To today's Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is on suicide awareness, presented by Amanda Walsborn with UCO Health. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Hey, thanks for having me. All right. So to get us started, September is Suicide Awareness Month. This week is Suicide Prevention Week, and today is World Suicide Awareness Day. So very good timing on scheduling this presentation, and I'm very glad to be here. I've been doing suicide prevention work for a little over 3 years. I am an assist master trainer and QPR facilitator, and we'll talk more toward the end of my presentation about what each of those programs are. So to get us started, I like to give people an idea of the scope of the issue. We do have data on suicide deaths, state, national, and some local data, but the data that we have is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's estimated that another 5 to 25% of suicides go unreported or misreported. And that's especially here in Oregon. So in Oregon, a suicide is only ruled as such if there is, without any shadow of a doubt, that the cause of death was suicide. So either it was witnessed or the means leave no room for possible other interpretation. And then suicide behaviors. So individuals who maybe attempt or gather means, those types of behaviors, and they're 40 to 100 times greater than the number of suicides. Here in Umatilla County, we had 20 suicides reported in 2018. And so we've got somewhere from a few hundred to 2,000 individuals who have not only had thoughts of suicide, but have actually taken action. And that's very sobering. 5% of the total population have thoughts of suicide. So this is a big issue, and it's something that many individuals struggle with. I don't want to spend too much time on statistics, but I did want to include this slide to share the information with you. It is from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, and I really like this slide set. They update these graphics each year. There's always a lag in official suicide reporting data, so generally it's about 1.5 to 2 years behind date. But the overall picture, unfortunately, is generally the same. And the take-home messages from this, suicide is the 8th leading cause of death in Oregon. It's the #1 leading cause of death for young people in Oregon, so individuals aged 10 to 24. And there's a huge economic impact as well. That is another consideration. So being that there are so many individuals who struggle with thoughts of suicide, and suicide is so prevalent in our society, why don't we talk about it more? So we look at it as the other S word. It's something that it connotates shame in some societies and in some cultures. There's a big stigma just around talking about mental health in general, let alone mental health struggles or help-seeking behaviors. It's very taboo to have those discussions in some cultures and in some areas of our society. And then put those pieces aside, it's uncomfortable. Our culture and society sees mental health and mental health challenges often are viewed as a sign of weakness. And so there's discomfort in talking about them. There's discomfort in admitting that someone is struggling. There's a lot of discomfort in reaching out and offering to help someone else. And also a lot of fear in doing so. And then compiled on those factors, there is quite a lot of lacking information and even some misinformation out there. And so we'll go through a few slides that will take a look at some of the pretty common myths and facts around suicide. And we'll walk through those. So it's a little bit harder to do the interactive piece for those of you who are on the screen, but we can give it a shot if you like. There's not too much feedback. And then for those of you in the room, so how this works is as each statement comes up, I'd like for you all to tell me if you think it's a myth or a fact. And then we'll go through and we will talk about each one. Okay. So our first one, no one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. Myth or fact? Myth. Good. So for those of us working in suicide prevention and advocating for suicide awareness, know that suicide is not an inevitability, even for those who, for lack of better phrasing, seemed most determined or most focused on suicide. Right? So our reality, and I'll give you this one, the fact version, is if most people in crisis get the help they need, they will probably never be suicidal again. So, of course, there are individuals that struggle with constant thoughts of suicide. And a subset of those who have recurrent suicidal behaviors. But for the majority of individuals who think about suicide, it's something that happens for a very brief period of time in their life. There is a crisis or trauma or a series of crises and trauma that build up. And so there's an escalation. Maybe there's an escalation of, depression, addictive behaviors that can contribute. And when that peaks with the thoughts of suicide or suicidal action, that peak time period is usually only about 48 hours. So when you're looking at an entire lifespan for someone, it's a very small period of time where they have feelings that would prompt them to act on thoughts of suicide. How about this one? Confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk of suicide. Myth or fact?
Myth.
Myth. Good. Yeah, they get a little bit trickier. Okay. So it is true that someone may initially react with anger when they're asked if they are thinking about suicide, but overwhelmingly, individuals who have been asked if they had thoughts of suicide reported after the fact that their feeling was relief. So relief that somebody noticed their struggle and recognized it. Relief that somebody cared enough to reach out. And so please don't let a temporary reaction of anger deter you from asking someone about their mental health when it's something that you are concerned about. Okay. Asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers anxiety, opens up communication, and lowers the risk of an impulsive act. Is that fact? Okay. Yeah, so when you ask someone if they're thinking about suicide and they divulge that to you, it's out in the open. Suicide at that point isn't a big secret anymore. And it just having told someone that a person is thinking about suicide can usually de-escalate and start to diffuse the situation. Not always, but in many cases, the first step in the healing process for someone with thoughts of suicide is admitting that they have those thoughts. Only experts can prevent suicide. I have been working in this field for a few years now, but I am by no means a suicide prevention expert. But I believe that I have the tools to help prevent suicide, and I believe that all of us have the ability to do that. Biggest piece is connection. Caring enough to recognize that someone is struggling and having the bravery to ask about their struggle or to point it out to someone else who's better equipped to ask the person. Suicide prevention is everybody's business, and anyone can help prevent the tragedy of suicide. Good. Yep. Next. Suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. Good. Yep. These start to get a little bit trickier. Very good. That is a myth. Okay. Before I skip ahead too quick, so the suicidal people rarely keep their plans to themselves. In almost all instances, they are giving out what we call warning signs or invitations to ask about suicide. However, those invitations rarely come in a nice little package that clearly says, hey, I'm thinking about suicide. The majority of time, those invitations and disclosing the plan comes as an offhanded comment here or there, changes in behavior, things that may seem little when they're taken by themselves, but as you look at the whole picture of a person and your interactions with them, really paint a troubling picture of someone who is struggling. And hand in hand with that, those who talk about suicide don't do it. Myth or fact? Good. And so talking about suicide is one of the biggest and most glaring and most urgent warning signs that a person can give you. Unfortunately, there are enough cases of the boy who cried wolf syndrome, if you would, that You hear someone say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed I could die right now," or a young kid, "I failed that test, I'm gonna go kill myself." Enough of those phrases have become part of, dare I say, normal language in our society that it's not as alarming. And that is scary and unfortunate for those who really need the help. Our brains are pretty amazing, and they're also pretty easy to condition. And so the first time we hear someone say that they're thinking about killing themselves, they're thinking about harming themselves, we're really alarmed. We're probably pretty alarmed. Maybe the hairs on the back of our neck stand up, and we're more likely to take action right away. Okay? The 10th time we hear somebody say that, or the 100th time we hear somebody say that, our warning level decreases a lot, and it becomes harder for us as helpers to take those statements seriously. So there's two ways to help that. And so first is being mindful of language, not using statements like "I could die right now" to express other emotions like embarrassment, and helping to coach our children and our peers against using those statements as well. Teach why it is important that our society not become conditioned to hearing someone say that they have thoughts of dying, that they wish they were dead. That's very important that we start to shift that, and make some real considerations for how language can become everyday like that and can impact those who need the help most. And then the second piece is by taking it seriously every time. So every time you hear someone say that they wish they could die, they're thinking about suicide, react strongly and consistently. So work to connect that individual to help, stage either an intervention with the person yourself if you're equipped to do so, or identify someone who has the capacity to have those conversations with the person making those statements. So, and a couple of things will happen with that consistency. Reacting and treating every mention of thoughts of dying or thoughts of suicide as a serious statement will connect those who are struggling to help. And it also helps with teaching for those who are using that language casually or inappropriately to express other emotions. Most suicidal people communicate their intent during the week preceding their attempt. I covered that one a little bit already. Fact. People who talk about suicide may try or even complete an act of self-destruction. Also fact. A couple more here. Once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them.
Yeah.
So one of the most famous people in suicide prevention circles is Kevin Hines. Anybody in here familiar with Kevin Hines? So he survived a suicide attempt by leaving from the Golden Gate Bridge, and is one of very, very few people to have survived that experience. And having gone through that and the recovery process, he's now a huge advocate for suicide prevention. And one of the things that he says when he tells his story is that he rode the bus to the bridge, and he had told himself if just one person asked him what was wrong, one person reached out to him, that he wouldn't go through with his suicide attempt. And so it didn't happen on the bus. He got off the bus and was on the bridge itself, was visibly upset. And a woman came up to him, and he thought, okay, this is my person. They're reaching out to me. And she asked him to take her picture. So that's a story that's always stuck with me. And if you get a chance to do so, I highly recommend looking up Kevin Hines. He's got several videos on YouTube. He has a movie that's out now, and it's very real, and a very inspiring story. And finally, suicide is the most preventable kind of death, and almost any positive action may save a life. So I include this slide in here because the main reason people don't reach out to others who are struggling is because they're afraid. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do it wrong? What if I make it worse? And all of those are valid fears, yes, but someone who's struggling with thoughts of suicide, again, they need connection. And so while there are quote unquote right and wrong ways to reach out, don't let fear stop you. That connection is the biggest piece. And so just having the courage to reach out and recognize that someone is struggling is a huge life-saving tool in and of itself. If you're interested, that's weird how that got cut off. So if you're interested in learning some of that tool set, on having some skill to be able to identify individuals who may be at risk of suicide, practice techniques for reaching out, those people who are trained to do that or have the ability to do that are called gatekeepers. And any one of us can be a gatekeeper. And for learning how to save a life, it really is a short time commitment. And there's even just looking at phrasing. For example, I've got some of the wallet cards in the back that have a listing of warning signs for suicide. Having just that basic information and the number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, those are two really easy tools that come in a tiny business card-sized piece of paper. Life-saving is grand, but it doesn't always have to be difficult. So some training opportunities. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm an Assist Master Trainer. So Assist is an intensive 2-day suicide intervention workshop. So participants learn how not only to identify someone who is struggling, but how to actually walk through a complete intervention with them, and move someone from a place where they're focused on thoughts of suicide to a place where they're focused on the future. And even if that future is the next 10 minutes, they're in a place of safety. Unfortunately, that training's not able to be done virtually, and so we don't have any workshops scheduled currently, but hope to do so as soon as pandemic safety allows. A couple of other programs that are available virtually, Living Works Start is a program that is pretty new, developed by the same parent company that develops Assist. And so it's a 90-minute online interactive program that walks through basically the basics of suicide prevention. And so how to identify when someone is struggling. It walks through some scenarios, gives suggestions on language, and suggested follow-up. Okay. Very similar, QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. That's a program that I also facilitate. It is a brief introduction to suicide prevention. That course can be anywhere from 45 minutes to, an hour and a half and change, give or take a little bit. And it has core content that, again, walks through identifying when someone is struggling, the barriers to asking someone if they're thinking about suicide, going through suggested language for that question piece. How do you ask someone if they're thinking about killing themselves? Persuading them to get help, and then referring them to that help point of contact. And so for an idea of continuum for suicide prevention and intervention, Living Works Start and QPR are two programs that I say are kind of side by side in the level that they are. They're both pretty introductory and focused on prevention. Someone trained in either Living Works Start or QPR may refer someone that they identify as being at risk of suicide to a person who's Assist trained in order to be able to facilitate the intervention. Do have a big awareness activity that takes place annually. The Out of the Darkness walk through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. This will be my third year of chairing Umatilla County's event. Sadly, with COVID-19, all of our events are virtual, and so rather than having an individual county-wide event, the Oregon AFSP has developed the Oregon Out of the Darkness virtual experience. And so we have a couple of pieces that are going on right now. So if you'd like to participate in the event as someone from Umatilla County, you can register at afsp.org/Pendleton. They have activities that are open right now. So there are some pieces of the Out of the Darkness walk that are really traditional, and a big part of that is activities around memorial and recognizing your why. So why am I an advocate for suicide prevention, and sharing that. So we have a couple of different virtual walls that you can go in and you can share your why. You can share a story of remembrance. There's a space for photos. I think there's even space for uploading a short video if anyone chooses to do that. I've participated in the My Why section. It was pretty short and felt neat to be able to do that and to see some of the other comments from other areas around the state. So really encourage people to check out the Out of the Darkness walk, and then the virtual experience will stream live on Saturday the 26th, so a couple weeks from now at 10 a.m. It will be recorded and available for later viewing as well. Okay. And then I wanted to share some suicide prevention resources. Of course, most prevalent of which the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The Oregon Youth Line is one that I really like for youth. It is a youth resource line, not just for suicide prevention, but for any topic. A youth who was struggling with friend dynamics or homework could reach out to this line and receive support. The coolest part about the youth line is that it's a peer-based service, and so when a youth reaches out to the youth line, they are being connected with someone who is between 13 and 17. They're located in Oregon. There's now 2 centers, so there's a center in Portland and now one in Bend. So our local youth know that they're reaching someone who is going to be in their approximate age range and at least knows where to find Oregon on a map. And then, so the line itself is staffed all hours. When there are not youth available to staff it, I think the youth hours are like 4 to 10. It is staffed by staff members from Lines for Life, most of whom are individuals who've aged out of the youth program and are still volunteering with Lines for Life. Then locally, we have Lifeways, we have a crisis line and a warm line service available. And then there's a nationwide crisis text line, 741-741. So I strongly encourage you to have at least one of these resources at your disposal so that you always have a place that you can refer someone to if you encounter someone who's struggling with thoughts of suicide. And just knowing that there's a next step. If you are in a position where you ask someone if they have thoughts of suicide and that person says yes, it provides a lot of reassurance to us as a helper to have a plan for next step and know where to refer them to. So, all right, well, that's all I have. Does anybody here or on camera have any questions?
I know it's only been a few months since the pandemic started, but have you seen an increase in suicide since we've been dealing with the pandemic? And that really all the repercussions that go with that?
Yeah, so anecdotally, yes, but because of data lags, we don't have anything concrete to be able to say with certainty, yes, we've seen this much of a shift. I do know that calls to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, those have increased dramatically during pandemic time. But as far as actual attempt or death data, we don't have anything concrete. All right. Thanks so much for having me and for joining me for Party and Lunch Hour.